One problem has plagued streaming series ever since that format blew up about 10 years ago. That problem is poor pacing. While some streaming series have managed to avoid it, the problem is so pervasive that it afflicts shows regardless of genre, length, or overall quality. Lots of lousy streaming shows are poorly paced, but some otherwise excellent ones are too. I'm sure we can all think of an example of an awesome streaming series that starts out great and ends great, but kind of drags a little somewhere in the middle. As I see it, there are primarily two reasons why poor pacing is so prevalent in these particular programs. One is a commercial reason. The first streaming shows to gain mainstream popularity were released on Netflix, which typically dropped every episode of the season at the same time. This release model encourages binge watching, and the producers of the shows leaned into that by telling stories that were heavily serialized. If the season was 13 episodes long, instead of 13 separate but related stories, you'd get 13 installments of one big story. There's no particular reason why a streaming series needs to be serialized, but because the first successful streaming shows, most notably House of Cards, were structured that way, and because television executives as a group are not known as creative risk-takers, serialization became the standard model for streaming series, whether their seasons were dropped all at once or according to a more traditional one-episode-per-week schedule. The other reason is a creative one. Fundamentally, this is a writing issue. It's rooted in how the overarching plot of a series or a season of a series is laid out. The stories of many serialized streaming series follow the same three-act structure that we're familiar with from films. Act 1 is the setup. We learn who the hero is and what they want. Act 2 is the struggle. The hero faces an increasingly difficult series of obstacles as they try to achieve their goal. Act 3 is the resolution. The hero's efforts to overcome the obstacles in their way build to a climax, which then leads to a payoff. The hero either does or doesn't achieve their goal. At first glance, this seems to make sense. The three-act structure is a sturdy, reliable way of building a story. But when we take a structure that usually works just fine for a movie and use it as the model for a series, we run into some issues. Here's a visualization of a simple three-act structure based on the model described by Sid Field in his book Screenplay, probably the most widely read and influential book on screenwriting ever written. The inciting incident is the first really important event in the story. It's the thing that sets the hero off on their journey and starts the plot in motion. The first plot point is a major event at the end of Act 1 that pushes the story into Act 2. It raises the stakes for the hero. Halfway through Act 2 is the midpoint, which is an event that changes the hero's perspective or causes them to learn something significant or have an important realization about their journey. Act 2 ends with the second plot point, which, again, is a major event that pushes the story toward the climax and ultimately the resolution. I also want to point out that this visualization is to scale. If you notice, Act 1 and Act 3 each make up about 1/4 of the story, and Act 2 makes up the other half. The length of each act relative to the total length of the story is also an important component of the three-act structure. To see how this works when we apply it to a season of a streaming show, let's imagine a 10-episode dramatic series. That's fairly typical. If we break the story of this 10-episode season down according to the three-act structure, we get Act 1 consisting of episodes 1, 2, and 3, Act 2 consisting of episodes 4, 5, 6, and 7, and Act 3 consisting of episodes 8, 9, and 10. Once again, at first glance, presented in such a simplified outline, this might seem like a good way to structure a story. But remember, we're not plotting a 2-hour movie here. We're plotting a 10-episode dramatic series. For the sake of our example, let's just say our episodes are each 45 minutes long. If our first plot point happens at the end of Act 1, that means we don't get there until the end of Episode 3. In a 2-hour movie, Act 1 lasts around 30 minutes. In our 10-episode streaming series, Act 1 lasts 2 hours and 15 minutes. Act 2, which in a 2-hour film lasts around 1 hour, would account for 4 episodes or 3 hours of the total runtime of our streaming series. Act 1 is about introducing the hero and other important characters and setting up the story and getting the plot moving. In terms of major story events, according to the 3-act structure, there's the inciting incident and the first plot point. Most streaming shows that follow this storytelling model place the inciting incident at the end of episode 1, which makes sense. The inciting incident is supposed to be a dramatic event and should therefore serve as a strong hook to pull the viewer along to the next episode. But after the inciting incident, there's not another important story beat until the first plot point. So, what do you do for the next 2 episodes? The answer, most of the time? You stretch. You tell the same amount of story you could have told in 30 minutes if this were a movie, only you tell it very slowly. This is a problem no matter what the release schedule of the series happens to be. If the series is released 1 episode per week, then, as the creator of the show, you are expecting your audience to sit through 2.25 hours, spaced out over 3 weeks, to get to the first plot point. If the series is released all at once to encourage binge watching, you're expecting your audience to sit through 2.25 hours consecutively to get to the first plot point. Either way, you're taking way too long to get to a given point in the story. Long story short, while the simple 3-act structure works great for most movies, it doesn't work when you scale it up to fit a streaming series that lasts for 10 episodes, or 6 episodes, or 8 episodes, or 13 episodes. But for illustration purposes in this video, I'm going with 10. So, how might the writers of future serialized streaming shows fix this problem? Fortunately, the 3-act structure is not the only option available. There are countless other models for laying out stories, many of which work far better for a serialized episodic format than this one. I'm only going to talk about one. It's my personal favorite because I've used it in the past with success, if I do say so myself. Please don't think I'm trying to big myself up here. I make YouTube videos. That's all I do. That's all I've ever done. I've never sold a script. I've never written for a TV series. Nothing like that. I'm just a dude with some opinions. Fortunately for me, on YouTube, those are the only qualifications you need. But I have written series with serialized stories before. Up until a couple of years ago, one of the staples of this YouTube channel was a series called Steve and Stuffy. It chronicled the misadventures of a fictionalized version of me alongside a cast of characters played by stuffed animals. The entire series is still on the channel, and I'd love for you to watch it if you haven't before. Whether you find it funny or entertaining or, good is very much a matter of taste, but I do think that the overarching plots of several of the show's seasons are fairly well laid out, and that the pacing is pretty solid. When it came time to lay out a season of the Stuffy series, I relied on a model taken not from film or television or even literature, but from music. I call it album structure because it's how albums are structured, or at least how they used to be, usually. Sometimes. It works something like this. You visualize your series not as a movie with a 3-act structure, but as an album, and each episode of your series is a song on that album. Back in the day, or if you're some kind of fucking hipster, currently, albums were released on 10 or 12-inch vinyl records, called LPs for long playing. LPs were 2-sided, so albums were divided in half. They had a side A and a side B. Even though most albums don't have a plot, per se, they still have a meaningful song order. You don't find many albums where all the slow songs are on side A and all the fast songs are on side B. There's a rhythm, there's a progression that makes sense thematically or sonically or somehow. And that progression is part of what makes the album as a whole cohesive and enjoyable to listen to. For an example, let's take a look at one of my favorite albums ever. Bruce Springsteen's Darkness on the Edge of Town. Just as our imaginary streaming series has 10 episodes, Darkness on the Edge of Town has 10 songs, 5 on side A, 5 on side B. Side A starts out with Badlands, a fast-paced, kick-ass rock anthem. It's breathless and passionate and up-tempo, and it makes you excited about listening to the rest of the album. Or at least that's the idea. Your mileage may vary. Maybe your taste in music sucks. Nothing personal. Anyway, the next song is Adam Raised a Cain, which still goes pretty hard, but slows it down some. It's darker, more brooding, with lyrics full of religious imagery and familial conflict. Then comes Something in the Night, slower still, softer, regretful. Then Candy's Room, which starts kind of slow but gathers speed in a hurry, pulling you back up emotionally. And then side A finishes with Racing in the Street, which brings you down again. It's slow, introspective, and wistfully sad. Flip the album over to side B, and the same process repeats itself, only this time the emotions are turned up even higher. Or perhaps I should say supercharged, because a lot of the songs are about, like, cars and street racing and stuff. Anyway, side B begins with The Promised Land, another big up-tempo number with a hook that's great to sing along with, really opens the album back up after the melancholy conclusion of side A. After that, Factory, another slow one tinged with resignation, and also matches up thematically with the more exuberant The Promised Land. Then comes Streets of Fire, still slow but more emotionally fraught. Then Prove It All Night, one last up-tempo one to put you in a good mood and get you out of your chair. We're talking about the vinyl version, so I'm assuming you're not listening to it in the car. And finally, the album ends with the title track, Darkness on the Edge of Town, which starts out slow and quiet and builds to an intense and immensely satisfying crescendo that then resolves in a way that ties the entire album together musically, lyrically, thematically, emotionally. It feels complete. And most importantly, it feels as though you've just listened to something coherent and meaningful that was well balanced, so it never felt repetitive and it never got boring. How do we translate this sort of album structure to a serialized dramatic story? First, we need to remember, as we lay out our story, that every single episode, just like every single song on an album, needs to be consequential and necessary in and of itself. Every episode needs to be about itself and what is happening in it, not about what is going to happen in a future episode. That doesn't mean that episodes can't or shouldn't set up things for upcoming episodes. They must do that. It's kind of hard to do serialized storytelling if they don't, but that can't be the only thing they're doing. There are songs on Darkness on the Edge of Town that set up other songs on the album. I mentioned how The Promised Land sets up Factory. They both deal with working-class people being ground down by the circumstances of their lives. The first song is upbeat, hopeful, defiant, while the second is weary and resigned. But The Promised Land is its own song. It's not there just to set up Factory. It does, but that's not its reason for existing. So each episode of the series needs to be interesting and important in its own right. Not just devoted to table setting and not there only to allow the narrative to tread water until it's time for something important to happen. If the season's overarching story is the focus of an episode, that episode needs to move that story forward in a significant way. And that needs to begin with episode 1. Instead of waiting until episode 3 to reach the first plot point, as with the scaled-up 3-act structure, have not only the inciting incident, but also the first plot point occur by the end of episode 1. Why so soon? Because the first plot point marks the end of the setup. It's the point at which the story actually begins to be about what it's about, if that makes sense. One episode, or approximately 45 minutes of screen time, is plenty of time to get to that point in the story. By the end of that first episode, the plot of that season's overarching story should be in motion. We should know who the hero is, what they want to accomplish, and what they need to do in order to accomplish it. Obviously, there are 9 episodes to go, so there are going to be some twists and turns. We're going to raise the stakes. The plot is going to go places the audience might not anticipate just based on the first episode. But at the end of that first episode, we should at least feel like the plot is going somewhere and have an idea of what the stakes are at this point. So, if episode 1 includes both the inciting incident and the first plot point, what happens in the next few episodes? That depends on the story you're telling and how you decide to tell it. If you can break your serialized story down so that it has 8 or 9 plot points, that is 8 or 9 significant events that drive the story forward or push it in new directions without becoming repetitive or overly complicated, then go ahead and lay out a season where every episode ends with a plot point. But if you lay out your serialized story and you find that it only has, say, 4 plot points, that's fine too. In fact, it's probably better. 9 plot points is a lot, if you ask me. When you're structuring your season, just make sure to lay it out so that your 4 plot points come at the right times. What are the right times? Let's refer back to the album structure. Start strong with a plot point at the end of episode 1 to get things moving. Then, remembering that we're dividing our 10-episode season in half, I would put the second plot point either at the end of episode 4 or the beginning of episode 5. Then have episode 5 end on a note of resolution. You can't wrap up the entire story here, obviously. You're only halfway through, but resolve something to give this first half of the season a sense of closure, while still leaving important plot threads unresolved to serve as a tease or a hook to pull us into the second half. Side B, we repeat the process, but we raise the stakes. Plot point number 3 at the end of episode 6, and our 4th and final plot point coming at the end of either episode 8 or 9, depending on how you want to handle the resolution. If you can do it justice in one episode, drop the last plot point in episode 9 and wrap things up in episode 10. If you need 2 episodes, then the last plot point goes in episode 8, set up the conclusion in episode 9, end with a hook, and pay everything off in episode 10. You may have noticed that this layout doesn't account for all 10 episodes. This is because, in our example, our imaginary story has 4 major plot points. So, what happens in the rest of the episodes? Well, that depends. If you want your season's overarching story to be the central focus of every episode, you could structure it to unfold in a series of multi-episode mini-arcs. Maybe instead of having the first plot point at the end of episode 1, you have it at the end of episode 2, and then episode 3 and 4 build to plot point number 2, and then episodes 5 and 6 build to plot point number 3, and episodes 7 and 8 build to plot point number 4, which then propels us toward the resolution in episodes 9 and 10. That's probably not how I would structure it. I like having the first plot point at the end of episode 1 to kick off the story without any unnecessary screwing around. Also, I happen to believe that form should dictate content to some degree. If you're writing a series of 10 45-minute episodes, then the stories you're telling should be able to be told effectively in 45-minute segments. Not 90-minute segments that you've cut in half to make 2 episodes. But that's part of my personal writing philosophy. It need not be yours. And again, I'm a dude on YouTube. What do I know? My preferred method of dealing with the potential problem of having too many episodes and not enough plots is to lay out the season so that the overarching story is not the central focus of every episode. If we assume that the overarching story of our 10-episode season has 4 major plot points and that those plot points happen in episodes 1, 4, 6, and 9, and that episode 5 is where we reach a minor resolution to end the first half, and episode 10 is where we reach the ultimate resolution of the entire season, that leaves us with 4 episodes unaccounted for. I say use those remaining slots to create 4 specimens of a kind that has become tragically rare in today's serialized streaming television landscape: the standalone episode. In other words, if your overarching story only gives you enough plot for 6 episodes out of 10, make the other 4 episodes about something else. Not something else entirely, obviously. You're still telling stories about your established characters in their established world, but the focus for these episodes is not the overarching season-long story, but a smaller story that can be set up and paid off within a single episode. These smaller stories can be related to the larger story, or they can have little or nothing to do with it. It's up to you. Does your hero or one of the other important characters have something in their backstory that is relevant, but perhaps not directly related to the larger story? Would that make for a good episode? Drop something into episode 1 or 2 to make us curious about that character's backstory, and then pay off that curiosity with a flashback story in episode 8. Does your hero have family issues that have been mentioned a time or two in other episodes? Maybe do a show where they pay a visit back home and we get to meet those family members our hero has such a problem with. Or perhaps our hero simply gets pulled into a few smaller adventures that don't have anything to do with the overarching plot of the season, but are worthwhile stories in their own right and help to develop the character of our hero. There are endless possibilities. However you choose to go about filling out those 10 episodes, the important thing is to maintain a balanced pace, both narratively and emotionally. Start strong, kick it up, bring it down for a couple of episodes, bring it back up, kick it up again, bring it back down for 2 or 3 more episodes, and then bring it up as high as it'll go to push it toward the end. Every episode is a song on the album. Every episode needs to be about something and be worthwhile in and of itself. This is easier said than done. I'm speaking here only of the basic structure of a story. Actually writing it is a completely different matter. It's a simple thing to say, oh, put the first plot point here and set something up here so you can pay it off over there. But anyone who has ever actually written like that knows there's a lot more to it. Writing can be a long, frustrating, and humbling process, and the story we end up with often looks very different from its earliest version. And that's under the best of circumstances. Writing for television, including streaming television, adds a whole new set of difficulties and sources of stress to the mix. I based the structure I've been talking about on an album. Well, if you start out wanting to make a 10-song album, but then after your recording sessions are done, you realize you've only got 9 good songs, you can always just release a 9-song album. But if you're hired to write a 10-episode streaming series for Disney+, you probably can't just decide to make it 9 episodes instead. If Chairman Mouse orders 10 episodes, he means 10 episodes. Writing is hard. Writing well is harder. Writing well for serialized television is harder yet, and I respect anyone who does it, and I am by no means saying that I could do it better than anyone else, especially since I've never actually done it. But I do think a lot of the fundamental writing problems that have bedeviled many, many streaming series could be addressed by simply starting with a different mindset. The 3-act, 2-plot-point structure of a 2-hour movie doesn't work when scaled up for a multi-episode series. You end up with 2 hours worth of story smeared across 6 or 7 or 8 hours. And some people say they like that. To each their own, but I find it excruciating. There are better ways to structure stories for a serialized streaming format. I think the model I've described is one, but if you disagree, don't blame me. Take it up with him. And if you want to see him, I can tell you he's easily found. He said to tell you there's a spot out neath Abrams Bridge, and tell you there's a darkness on the edge of town.
There's a darkness on the